You are listening to Therapist Unplugged for straight talk on life, relationships, and mental health. I am your host, Laurie Poole, licensed professional counselor with the Montfort Group in North Dallas. Each episode will feature the unplugged views of guests and fellow therapists as we navigate hot topics, therapy trends, and the world around us.
All right. So, Rhett, are you ready to have some fun?
I am ready.
Good
Let's do it.
stuff.
Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do this because
Here's
we're
all
going to
crazy.
have one of my favorite topics, which is about men.
Okay, I love it.
Okay.
We're talking about men.
Love to talk about men. And listen, welcome to Therapist Unplugged. I am so happy that we have time to kind of put our thoughts together and talk about men and emotions and anxiety and relationships and all that good stuff, because I think in my practice as a couples therapist, I don't want to say that men get a raw deal necessarily, but I will say that there seems to be far less wiggle room for how emotions are expressed and processed and communicated and so on. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity to dedicate our conversation to all about men.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. And I mean, I'm a man, but there is that bias, I think, for counseling for guys, especially if they come in as a couple. I think they're looking at me and wondering if I'm going to treat them fairly,
Yeah,
or if I'm going
yeah,
to side with their wife. Sometimes their wife is worried that since I'm a guy, I might align with him. So
yeah.
it's complicated, I think, for men historically because they typically aren't the ones that are going to therapy. Um,
No, it's not very often that I've seen men initiate couples therapy, for
yeah,
example. It's usually a wife who will say, okay, we've hit critical mass, or something's not working. I'm not happy. This doesn't seem to, we need some tools in our box. And so, you know, male partners will come in and sometimes it's,
yeah,
you know, reluctantly.
yes. And I feel like my experience, if I can get a guy in the room one time
Uh-huh.
and create an environment where they feel like emotionally safe, and I don't think this is just me. I think if other therapists can do it too, that people are surprised. I think guys are willing to come back. They're willing to do the work. They just don't want to feel they're walking into a trap or
Yes.
they're being ganged up on.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. I think that's a huge piece of it. There's the anticipation of a therapist taking the side of the wife or the female partner, when in fact, I've often found that men can be even more workable. That's
Yeah.
the irony, because women can talk a lot, but not say very much.
Mm.
And by that I mean, in a couples situation, there can be a lot of reactivity. And so women are identified as being more emotional than men.
Yeah.
But often it's the reaction to the emotion they're experiencing that their partner sees, and not really the deeper emotions that are driving that reaction.
Yeah. What do you do in a situation like that then? You personally?
What do I do personally?
Yeah. If
I
you notice that happening in the room.
I slow it right down.
Yeah.
And okay, so I'm going to use my therapy voice, Rhett.
Yeah.
I'll say something like, wow, I see a lot of stuff coming up right now. Can we just slow this down, because what you're saying is really important and I want to understand this.
Hmm.
And so I'll start right with all the reactivity and I'll say, I'm really curious. Could it be that in this instance, you're working so hard to connect with your husband and he's not responding in a way that offers up some comfort and reassurance? And I think what I'm seeing is a lot of protest to the way that feels. So
Uh,
I'm just kind of role playing here, but
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I might kind of look at, okay, what is the reaction? I might reframe it as a protest.
Yeah.
Well, this is a real protest. You're fighting so hard for that connection, and you're not sure that he really understands.
Hmm.
So it might be more focused on, or I'll say something like, I don't want you to talk about him right now. I just want to hear about you.
Yeah.
Tell me everything. but I
Yeah.
just want to hear about you. And
Yeah.
so I then process it with the wife and say, man, this is really hard because you want so badly to connect with him and you're longing for that. And you're pulling out all the weapons, firing shots across the bow, protesting because you want so badly to be seen and understood. So I might, that's kind of a fast forward, but I slow it right.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's the value in couples therapy too, is sometimes one of the partners gets to watch you work with their spouse and see things and hear things that they don't typically have access to.
That's
And
right.
that can
That's
be
right.
super helpful.
No, for sure. And ultimately my goal is, do you think you could turn to your husband now and in your own words share what you've just shared with me?
Yeah.
So that I'm actually, it's very experiential,
Yeah.
in terms of um and with men, can we talk a little bit about your practice, Rhett? Because
Sure.
I really wanted you as a guest on our podcast to talk specifically about men and your experience with men, how you work with men. So I'm wondering if you could speak to your practice. Um, and you mentioned also about anxiety. That seems to be one of your
Yeah. I mean,
niches.
I've been in private practice over here in the Plano, Frisco area probably
Yeah.
since like 2009-ish.
Okay.
I came from a ministry background. I was a college pastor out in Los Angeles, and found out that I like this stuff one-on-one more than getting up and talking.
Ah, okay.
And so this is kind of important though. They're old. I wrote a book on anxiety in 2012, and then the year later, the publisher had me write a book on men in 2013. So it's been years, but it
Okay.
seemed like that kind of set the trajectory that people were coming to me for anxiety or coming to see me because they were a man and I was a man. And, I was telling some the other day, at one point, I might have been one of the few male counselors up in Frisco area, especially like marriage counselors.
Yes.
Obviously, that's changed a lot. There's tons of therapists in this area. So, in any given week, it's not, I don't know, probably about a third of my people who show up in my office are couples. And a third are probably men or
Mhm.
adolescent boys, and then another third are probably women. So I feel like it's a pretty good mix
Okay.
that I get to work with and that I get to, I don't know, just experience each week. But probably like you, there are weeks that go by. I look at my calendar and it's like, oh, I have all men this week. How did
Right.
that happen?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. So it's a privilege. I like you. I feel like I try to be pretty experiential. I feel
Mhm.
like that's a growing edge for me. I'm part of a therapist community called Restoration Therapy. My mentor Terry Hargrave, he came out of the contextual family therapy movement back in the 70s and 80s and created this model called restoration therapy. And he's very experiential and um, sometimes that can create some anxiety for me in the room because I'm figuring out boundaries in the room, like
Yes.
what feels safe to a person, whether they're male or female, just in terms of just how we approach people. And so I was like, for example, last week I had a couple I was working with they were younger,
Mhm.
and I just got up and I'm like, I told the guy, I want you to stand up. And then I moved my chair, like my big chair, over in front of his wife and had him sit down in front of her. And I just worked with him as he was looking at her. And I was trying to get him to access emotions that I don't think he has much experience with.
Mm.
And it really shifted the therapy dynamic. And they communicated to me that they went home and just felt this shift, in their relationship. And so that
Wow.
doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes I feel a prompting and I don't jump on it, and then I'm kicking myself after.
Yeah. But it sounds like you took a risk, right? In other
Yeah,
words, in that it something felt like, okay, this could be, and the way you physically directed how he
yeah,
was sitting and what he was watching and being able to take in, etc. That sounds very powerful.
yeah. And Laurie, you probably know too, like when you're training as a therapist, they freak you out in the ethics class. And so you live in fear of not screwing up anything.
Right.
But I've noticed over the years just the importance of like getting people up, of shifting, of asking a person, is it okay if I put my hand on your arm? What
Right.
like what we do this, or we do some like sculpting in the room.
Yeah.
And so, I'm learning too in the room still. I just turned 50 last month, and so, I'm learning in my work. And I think clients teach me a lot too,
Oh
obviously
boy,
about
that's
how
so
to
true.
be a better person and better
Yeah,
therapist. And
you bet.
so, but yeah, guys are interesting. I think I'm fond of the work of like Terrence Real. There's a book he wrote many years ago. I don't want to talk about it. Its subtitle is The Hidden Legacy of Men in Depression. And
Yes.
there's something in there he said that I think about a lot. He looks at the data and the research of boys growing up
Mhm.
and says by the age 5, probably maybe 4, they've been given the message that's not safe to talk about how they feel. And so they start shoving emotions down early. And he says mostly they channel them um, towards anger or addictions, like in porn or sports or
Yeah,
violence. And so you got all these generations of men who've been told verbally or non-verbally, you can't really talk about how you feel. And of course, women have their own messages they're getting at young ages, but just
sure.
speaking about men,
Yeah.
so I feel most of the men that I work with, it's just giving them freedom and access to not only talk about how you feel, but let's help you figure out how do you feel. Let's have language because they don't know
Yes.
sometimes.
I have had the experience of even saying to a client in present time, what is it that you are experiencing right now in this moment? What are you experiencing right now? And it's very, very difficult to describe. So I might start with where are you feeling it in your body? Where do you notice? Do you have tension somewhere? Does your throat feel tight as we're talking right now?
Mhm.
Or do like to pay attention to sort of somatic symptoms of something if it's not feeling comfortable. But you're so right about language. I think actually part of our role as therapists is to offer language to
Yeah,
our clients. And I will often say things like, could I just throw this at you and you tell me if it resonates? Because
yeah,
I haven't got a clue, but can I help you out with some? And, I think to your point about ethics, someone could say, well, are you feeding someone like how they're like, are you influencing the way they actually feel? And I would argue that by offering up language, clients will say, no, that's not it at all. And I'm like,
yep.
cool, okay, good. All right.
They will let you know.
They will let me know. Absolutely.
Yeah, like that. This whiteboard behind me or on my door, I have these big like those sticky notes that people hang on walls,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm trying within the first sessions to like help clients kind of try on language. I'll send them home sometimes with a piece of paper because sometimes just having the words, they're looking at words and they're like, that's how I feel, but I didn't even know that's how I felt until I see the word on paper. And so we're just kind of playing around with options, I feel, for a while until something really sticks and they're like, this is how I feel. And I know when I feel this way, here's how I typically respond. And they're trying to connect those patterns. And
Mhm.
I feel like that's really, really helpful for people, especially for men.
Yeah, because if you don't know what is happening within in a relationship, how do you communicate that with your partner?
Right.
Because it's I think in couples work, particularly for both men and women, there is surprise to learn that actually I want to know about what's happening for you because right now you're focused on your partner, right? In terms of how they're responding to things and what's happening with them, and you're looking to them, but it's so important to be curious about yourself. And
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it helps you understand yourself better. And then I feel like as you're communicating and using that tool, that language, you're
yeah,
helping the person you're in relationship also understand you better. It works both ways.
absolutely.
And sometimes people come into therapy, it's their first time and they've never really thought through this or talked about how they felt, and
That's right.
sometimes they have a lot of experience and guys do show up and I feel like they're pretty adept at they're navigating their emotional life,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Rhett, if we're going to talk about anxiety, because anxiety has become the topic du jour, particularly since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it seems that people are increasingly open to expressing their struggles with anxiety. What do you notice, or what have you seen in regards to how men express and manage anxiety and what they're presenting with when they come in to see you?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I mean, just off the top of my head, I feel like if I'm going to kind of stereotype that a little bit across the board, in my experience, men, when they're anxious, seem to move into a couple different things. A lot of performance or achievement oriented stuff. Like if I feel anxious, I'm going to channel this into these performance
Okay.
achievement stuff. And that may be labeled some type of control, maybe. I can control this area of my life, be it work or a hobby, and I'm going to get really good at that. And if I get good at that, I can kind of quell some of the anxiety better. Um, Women, I've noticed now, women can do that obviously as well, but with women, what I've noticed more is a sense of like safety around, like I'm anxious, I feel a sense of a lack of safety or security around something. And so I'll notice a woman doing things to control to make her world feel more safe.
Mhm.
And I don't know, Basil van der Kolk in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, he
Yes.
talks about love and safety. My mentor talks a lot about love and trust, and that when there's violations, right, or in our relationships and our brains um, our brains create those neural pathways. It
Yeah.
seems we're moving towards a violation of love around my identity or violations of safety. This doesn't feel
Mhm.
trustworthy to me. And so I don't know. I look at those things a lot when it comes to anxiety. Where is the violation that they've experienced maybe growing up? Is
Mhm.
it around safety primarily, or around love and their sense of who they are? Um, but men seem to be really keen on who I am is dependent upon like what I produce or achieve,
Yeah.
and I'm
The
anxious about
metrics.
it. Yeah, I'm gonna dig into that.
Yeah.
But that only lasts so long because what happens when you can't be productive in that area? You can't keep the anxiety down.
No, exactly. And I think the metrics, what I have noticed in my work with men is that there are two areas that will um, generate a lot of conversation and
Hmm.
often tears is failure and
Hmm.
shame.
Mm.
Those two emotions, particularly
Yeah,
as it applies to a relationship. I'm failing. I can't make her happy. I can't
yeah,
get it right. Am I really enough? I don't know. Does she need me? Um, but I'm failing when we get into this negative cycle and things start to escalate. I just feel like I'm failing. And then I feel maybe a degree of shame about the fact that my performance as a husband, as a partner, because I'm hearing a lot of criticism. I don't know, it really depends on the scenario, but it seems to me that those are two emotions, shame and
yeah,
fear, that are big for men. To your point about performance and achieve.
yeah. I like how you said that because I have a handout, just has like a list of like 40 kind of feeling words on it, just to
Mhm.
kind of help people like think about stuff. And I'll send them out during the week. I don't always give homework, but want them just to kind of be aware and notice if anything resonates with them. And I'm fairly confident that 99% of the guys I'll work with, they'll come back and they will circle a cluster of words, and that word, they're different words, but they kind of get to the same point that you're saying. They'll talk about feeling a sense of inadequacy, a
Hmm.
sense of not measuring up, a sense of not being good enough, and like
Yeah,
failure, like those four words. And you're right. When I see that cluster of words, there's a lot of shame to them that they are not enough in some way.
yeah, yeah. And then, that can often too open the door to childhood experiences or family of origin
Yeah.
experiences where there were similar emotions that came up about inadequacy, shame, not being enough, um, family dynamics and relationships, the role they played in family. And of course, often those experiences come into the intimate partnership, right? In terms of, because they shape view of yourself,
Yeah.
where you understand your value and so on.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about things like the partner relationship and like sexual intimacy, I
Mm,
mean, you don't have to go very far to guys start talking about a sense of of failure or inadequacy or not measuring up in that part of their relationship, you know, and it shows up in a lot of areas. And I don't know, I was going to ask you if you think that failure and shame, is that, you think that's just historical? Like, you think that's only been a certain period of time for men and we're also in the United States and it's cultural? Or do you think it's
yeah.
just a broader global thing that if you had men in your room across the board, they would all say the same thing?
It's really interesting because that's a first of all, that's a fabulous question because I think all of those things play a part, as does race.
Hmm.
Your cultural and racial experiences around um, the role of a man and what expectations, meeting expectations, because there are so many different kinds of expectations. I think all of those things are an influence. And it's not something I have studied closely. Um, but it's fascinating. I don't know, Rhett, maybe we need to do a research project because
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I, I do think we could probably pull up ancient literature too and like go through it thousands of years ago, and there'd probably be some of the same language. But
yeah.
last week I drove one of my friends, he's a therapist in Amarillo, and he would just describe himself as a black guy, as a black therapist. He gets labeled even, he said when he did a deep dive into what people were Googling in terms of psychology today, it was
Mhm.
black therapist for him. And so we
Okay.
were driving to Amarillo together because he lives in Austin, and he was just telling me like there are things that he has to pay attention to the room that I don't have to, because of issues around what it means to be a man and his culture and like masculinity. And he runs into dynamics differently with a couple in the room than I would. And and so it was just interesting. We were just kind of unpacking
That's
that.
fascinating.
Yeah, so I think different cultures probably have to think differently about how they do marriage counseling and what that looks like. And I don't
I
know.
when I have had Black clients, I will ask right off the top, what what are your thoughts about coming to a white therapist,
Yeah.
a white middle-aged therapist?
Yeah.
Because I want to be aware, like I want us to be able to have that dialogue. Because if I'm missing something, I want to know, and I'm just curious about why.
Yeah.
Um, and what. So to your colleague's point, I would be curious about what he as a therapist needs to pay attention to and to be mindful of,
Yeah.
and the dynamics in the room, because there are expectations and experiences that are going to be different between cultures. I mean, there just are.
Yeah. I think him and I, and after kind of being with our colleagues all weekend, I think we kind of came up to the idea of just, you know, we have to show up as ourselves, and it's important to name some of those things in the room so
Yeah,
that there's just an awareness and people have the opportunity to talk through that. Um, because any type of therapist can do a really great amount of work with any type of client, but we have to be aware of how are we showing up in the room and how does that impact our clients. And
that's right.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I,
it's
I
very
I love how
interesting
you
work.
Yeah, it makes for very interesting work. Show up as ourselves, and
Yeah,
we're not always going to get it right. And I love what you said earlier in our conversation about what we learn from clients, because it's so true. Every single day, sitting in my office, I learned something that I didn't know the day before,
yeah,
either about myself as a therapist and what I bring into the room, what my clients teach me, what shows up in our collaboration, because I never sit as the expert on their relationship. I mean,
yeah.
I accompany, but I don't take on the role of expert. But I'm really, really curious about men, because I have had, I'm going to call just raw, almost sacred experiences with men in my office
Huh.
who, will think about something that happened to them in a relationship with themselves and dad, for example, and
Yeah.
the sobbing that will come up that surprises them
Yeah.
because we're hitting a wound that hasn't been rubbed against for a long, long time. And it's really fascinating to me. And I think there's so much wonderful work we can do as therapists. And I feel as though men are becoming increasingly open to more therapy and being curious about themselves and exploring themselves in a way that maybe they weren't before.
Gosh. Yeah. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking this is years ago, maybe 2009, 2010. I had a client in my room. He was 77. Um, just, not the type of guy who goes to therapy. And he started crying and he was remembering a story of when he was 7, being a boy, and his dad told him, as he was crying as a 7-year-old boy, his dad told him, put those tears away. And I'm like thinking, this guy's 77 now, and that is such a raw moment at 7 that taught him what it
Yeah,
means to be a guy in terms of emotions or safety around that. And to when you said sacred moments, I was thinking about that, and that actually kind of shifted my work a lot about how I think about guys who show up in my office, and this may be the only safe place that they have to talk about some stuff,
that's
you know?
right. Where they don't have to put their tears away.
Yeah. I had a guy this morning, you know, I told him, I said, it's a privilege to work with you and some of the stuff you've shared with me the last, several sessions. Like, I want you to know, like, it's a privilege. I take that very seriously, that I may be one of the few people you share that with. And
Right.
I don't know, it is, like you said, pretty sacred.
It really is. It really is. Do you think, Rhett, that I get the sense that roles are shifting? There's some confusion about the roles, and I'm going to
Mhm.
talk about a heterosexual context right now.
Yeah.
But I get the sense that there is confusion about the roles uh,
Yeah.
that men and women play in their relationships. Esther Perel, who I just love, talks
He's
about, oh
awesome.
my God, now we want someone who's going to be our lover, our best friend, our mentor,
Yeah.
our family preacher. I mean, like all these things that we expect in our partner. And then we go, oh, you see, you're not my soulmate. You can't, I mean, it's like, so there's this expectation of in roles that communities used to. We had other people in our community that we could talk to.
Mhm.
Extended family lived closer, and it seems like now we're putting all this pressure on a partner to be a quote unquote soulmate, whatever the heck that means.
Yeah.
And it I think I wonder if it has created particular pressure on men.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot with couples in my office, that they're just both really confused about who they're supposed to be in the relationship, and so, and to be fair, obviously things have shifted for women a lot in the
Mhm.
last 50 years, and the expectations around them,
Oh
to
yeah.
provide outside the house. And so, but with men in particular, I do find them confused because they've been handed in the like you said, in maybe the Anglo heterosexual tradition. This is the role that you do. You are the provider. You are supposed to lead the family. And then let's complicate that in a faith tradition. You're supposed to be the spiritual leader, and what does that even mean? And so
Hmm.
I think they are confused about what is my role, and then they're asked to be, which I think is a good thing, by the way. They're asked to participate in the child rearing more than they've
Yep,
ever had historically,
that's
and
right.
so I think they're confused about, okay, I got to provide because I might be the only person working outside the home.
Mhm.
I'm supposed to also like make time to be at every activity and game and school event. Um, and then I'm supposed to, spiritually lead the family, and then I'm supposed to do these things. And so I do think men are confused. And, you know, I I can have empathy for that at the same time, saying there's a lot of good shifts happening
Mhm.
culturally that I think are healthy for men to move out of that kind of narrow role of what it meant to be a provider. But I think it creates a lot of confusion for a young couple, for example, who they go into the marriage and they thought this is what the guy's role was, this is what the women's role was, and it's not turning out that way. And so I just try to come alongside them and talk about what do they want their marriage to look like?
That's
You
right. Because
know?
often they haven't had that kind of
No.
conversation to create this vision of what they expect. And they don't necessarily have role models of dads who were heavily involved in child rearing and so on. I think this is a more recent development. I mean, I think of where I am in my 60s, for example, and my children's father did not spend any
Yeah.
time being actively involved in child rearing at all. And I
Yeah.
don't think I'm unique in that regard.
And I got married a little bit later, I guess. I mean, I was 30, I was 30, 32 when my daughter was born. I have a son. And I mean, I went to every event. I was at every school event mostly. My wife and I rotated evening like feedings, because she wasn't
Yeah.
breastfeeding. We're doing bottles
Yeah.
and so I remember thinking, oh, this is not how it's supposed to be, like but
Yeah.
but I loved it. Like I loved being able to be there and see the things and stuff. And but that's different from like my dad, who was super involved in my life, but my mom was the primary nurturer.
Yeah.
Um, so it is confusing, and I think just trying to normalize, I guess, for guys in the room, and like you said, to talk about what do you want for your relationship? What do you want for your life? What does that look like? And let's have that conversation. And instead of thinking it has or should be a certain way, let's talk about it. And I do love Esther Perel. She's right. I mean, it is impossible for our partner to be everything to us. It's
Just
just
impossible. I mean, that's a tall order. And it's
huge.
and who wants to be all those things? I mean, you know, I wouldn't want to be all those things to somebody. That's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure. And we can't, it's unrealistic to think that one person can fulfill all our needs. That's why we need community. We need a tribe. We need what I call family, friends who become
Mm.
family, because um it adds so much richness to the tapestry of the way we live our lives, and we learn from this, and it's great for kids too. So I don't know, I think those are really important conversations about how do you envision this relationship, and what are your roles going to be.
Yeah. What do you think when you think about working with men, whether individually or in the context of marriage or just dating or partnership?
Yeah.
Where do you think we need to be going, like as therapists? Like what's important? Like what's not happening you think that needs to happen? Or where do we need to meet men at that maybe we're not in the mental health field? I don't know. I'm just curious what you think.
First thing that comes to mind is that we normalize that yes, you do have emotions, and yes, you do have feelings, and that's all part of the human experience.
Mhm.
And when you share that with your partner, when you allow that experience to be expressed, it actually creates greater connection, and a stronger connection, I think, in your relationship. But you also have, but like, be curious about yourself, because it takes tremendous courage to be vulnerable. And I think men in particular view vulnerability as weakness.
Mhm.
That's just BS. It
Yeah.
takes a huge amount of courage to be vulnerable with your partner and to show your underbelly, which goes against the grain of everything that men are socialized
Yeah.
to express. I think, and let's just put an extra layer of that on retired military,
Mm.
on men who have served on the police force,
Mm.
and in
First
other types
responders.
of first responders, etc., who've experienced and seen things that nobody should have to, but it's part of their profession or the role that they've played. But if there's anything, I guess, and I'm kind of listening to myself talk, Rhett, as I'm thinking out loud with you, I I really do. I think it is, if I could preach anything and work with it, it would be to reframe vulnerability. Now, I will say to retired military that vulnerability and getting into your feelings when you're in war,
Yeah.
protecting people, is not going to serve you. It's so counterintuitive. You have to be able to compartmentalize and push down, etc., to get in, to be able to get through and to function. Um, and so, you know, in post-military service, that's a real hard one, particularly in couples work. But I
Yeah.
think it can also be a huge relief to be able to share some of that if
Yeah.
if they're willing, if they're willing. And that's a really hard one. That's sort of a maybe an extra set of categories, but I think it's all shades of the same color to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I was thinking too, and this is probably why we need each other in terms of a community. We need different backgrounds, different
Mhm.
gender, everything. Because as a male, right, I'm clearly speaking from like a privileged position. I'm a white, heterosexual Christian background. Like, so
Yep.
I have a certain, right? So that's important because what I also see though over the last couple of decades, I think it's shifting,
Mhm.
is that, and again, women have experienced their own oppression for sure over the years,
Yes.
but like there was this trend for a while that if you were a guy or a certain flavor of a guy, like something was wrong with you. And so I saw a lot of boys kind of shame themselves because something must be wrong with them because they're a guy. I would see it come up with kids I'd work with in the school.
Mhm.
I'd have boys talk about they felt like they were being picked on in class sometimes by teachers for being a guy, for being a boy. And so I think over the years, that's led to some of this dangerous culture we see online of men and anger and
Mhm.
moving towards a lot of, I would say, very unhealthy types of masculinity and the expression of that. And so I don't know. I feel like it's important as a community, whether that comes from the mental health community, to obviously embrace everybody, for who they are and their own sense of uniqueness. And I don't know. I mean, I'm rambling here, but I think that's kept a lot of guys out of therapy, and I just think a lot of guys need help, and it's okay for them to be a guy, just because they were born a man. You obviously know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There was a trajectory for a long time, I think, of like boys felt like maybe they were being picked on for a little bit, and then I think that turned them into some dangerous paths that I don't like that I see.
Yeah.
And and I want to help those guys like connect to their vulnerability and find healthy
Yeah.
role models and healthy forms of masculinity. And
Well, and I think also the concept that you can be, that things can coexist. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be either or. Being
yep,
masculine doesn't have to be defined by the extent to which you express emotion and vulnerability.
yep,
Masculinity can also include vulnerability, self-awareness. We talk about emotional intelligence a lot these days, and you'll hear women say, like, if you look at dating profiles, I want a man who's emotionally intelligent. What the hell does that mean?
yeah.
Okay. Does that related to how well they listen to you? Is it about how they express themselves? Like, what does emotional intelligence mean? I think a lot of people don't understand, and that term gets thrown around. And what's a guy supposed to do with that? Am I an emotionally intelligent male? Listen, I think I think that kind of adds to the confusion and self-doubt and I don't want to be emotionally intelligent. I want to be a guy. I want to do the things I like to do. I want to be accepted for who I am.
Well, and sometimes I have a wife in here or a dating partner, and the guy is doing what I would maybe think as emotionally intelligent, talking about how he's feeling and he's really into it. And she's realizing I don't want any of that. Like I don't, you know, I don't want that in a relationship. So maybe we have to be careful what we ask for. I'm not sure.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
a very good point, Rhett, because women will say, like, this is what I hear. And to all my clients out there, my apologies if you think that I am painting with a broad brush. But I will say that often I've heard, but talk to me, talk to me.
Yeah.
I want to know what's going on. I feel like you're experiencing all these things and you're putting it together in your head, but I'm not included in any of that. And I have seen where, you know, a man will be very vulnerable with their partner, and like the partner then just doesn't really know what to do with it. But it's the thing, like you said, be careful for what you wish for, because if I come to you and I'm vulnerable and I'm sharing, some pretty raw stuff, I need to know that I've got a safe place to do that. And if it gets rejected or dismissed, or I feel in some way criticized, then it's going to be a very long time before I'll take that risk again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's why I like, I don't know, the work that we do. I mean, being in the room with somebody, boots on the ground, is really powerful, and I think too, we don't have to go down this path, but we live in a very pop psychology culture too online. And
Yeah.
so everyone's either diagnosing themselves or labeling people that they know.
Yes.
Um, and so it's stuff like emotional intelligence. We have an idea what that looks like, but to be in the room with people in a certain context and then to kind of unpack stuff with them in their relationship or in their
Yeah.
life is what I'm trying to remind myself that's the work I got to be doing and not worry what everybody else is doing or where things are going. And
That's right. No, that's very, very true. Rhett, I'm really curious about your experience as a male therapist, because especially in marriage and family, because there aren't a ton of
yeah,
male therapists. So can you speak a little bit about your experience and what that's been like for you?
yeah, it's actually always been kind of favorable for me because when I went to grad school, I
Uh,
was one of five, probably about five males in a class of like we were in like a 2-year cohort.
okay.
There were about 79 of us, and I think I was one of five males. So it actually worked in my favor because they wanted, I got to get picked for things, and
Uh-huh.
when they're looking for males, it was really helpful and important. And I did that work in California, so I'm an LMFT, so trained as a marriage
Right.
and family therapist. And when I moved to Dallas, um, and I moved to Dallas in 2008, so I've been here for like 15 years.
Hmm.
I People would come to me and say, "Oh, we're looking for a male therapist." And that's how we found you. And we're looking for a marriage and male therapist. So I think it's worked out really well. I actually enjoy it. Um, I will say that the two things I probably hear the most are either a woman saying, "We chose you as a male because I wanted my husband to feel like safe in the room, that you could identify. And if I was already going to therapy and I knew it'd be a hard bargain to get him in, we intentionally chose a male." And or I will hear the opposite sometimes. A woman will say, especially if there's been like an affair, let's say, and the
Hmm.
husband was the one violating the trust in the relationship. Can you, as a male, understand my experience as a female who is betrayed? Can you do that? And so I have to kind of walk through that. And I try to, answer those questions for them. But I say, really, you got to come. I, you should know in the first session, I think, if I'm going to be the right therapist for you. If not the first couple. And if I can be an advocate for you guys as a couple. And
Right.
so I think that's really worked out. And then yeah, I mean, I work with lots of guys, and I feel
I'm
like when a
thinking,
guy comes in a room, it's like, hey, they start talking and they start talking, and I'm like, it's so opposite what people think will happen with a man.
you
Sorry.
know, no, I was just gonna like, as a man and dealing with men and their emotions and anxiety,
Mm.
so on. I'm curious about what your experiences like as a man in the therapy room, as
I
a
see.
male therapist, like
Yeah.
just your own sort of manhood experience, etc. Because we bring ourselves into the therapy room, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's not just a bunch of theories that are going around our heads and then we're going to like work with it. We bring ourselves into the therapy room. So I was just curious about.
Yeah, and I didn't answer that question. So about my own experience,
Yeah.
I think I'm learning to be more vulnerable over time. And I think
Mm.
that's been a growing process for me. Like I want guys to show up and have emotions, but then I'll notice sometimes if a guy starts getting angry, like because I didn't grow up in a home with like anger and stuff. I don't know how to process that sometimes in the room, or if a guy starts crying, which I feel comfortable with, I'll notice certain things happening to me. But
Yeah.
honestly, at 50, I feel more confident as a man in the work I do now. But when I do training with colleagues and stuff, I realize how much more work there is to do for me personally.
I know, it's so humbling, right?
Yeah.
That's
And that's
it's
what I
so
love.
humbling.
But I guess to answer you like bluntly, like I get triggered in the room. And as a man, I'm faced with my own sense of what does it mean to me be like a man or to be masculine
Mhm.
in this room. And some days I walk out of session, I feel like that went really well and I handled it well and it was good. And there's some days I'm like, oh, I missed it there. I missed an opportunity um, to show up, I think, in a better way for this client or for this couple. Um, but yeah, I think it is challenging as a man. Like when emotions come up, I gotta learn to to um, I don't know, grow in my capacity of what that experience is like. And I think I still have growth to do, obviously. And so, um,
That's what I love about this work, Rhett, is that the growth just goes on and on and on and on. And in my late 60s, I
yeah.
continue to evolve at as a person, certainly. My experiences continue to happen. I bring different parts of myself into the therapy room, and I am increasingly comfortable with my own vulnerability with clients,
Mhm.
which could be something like, so let's use the example of a very escalated male client who's very angry and is, maybe heading towards the red zone. Because that can happen.
Yeah.
Taking the risk to say, what, as I'm listening to this, I want to hold space, but I have to tell, like, I'm also having, like, I am having a response to this anger,
Yeah.
and I'm I'm wondering if can we slow down, or can we, I just want to share this, or can I share an observation with you? Because I think that can also be a very powerful moment as we model our own vulnerability.
Yeah.
And we can do that while still maintaining, you know, authenticity and all the things that you want in the therapy room. But it's a former supervisor of mine who said, Laurie, you have to also be willing to go there yourself. If you're
Yeah.
expecting, if you, and of course, I practice emotionally focused therapy. So it's
Yeah.
all about what drives the dance and what's going on. But I thought, yeah, that's a little counterintuitive that we should be, as therapists, vulnerable with our clients.
Well,
But
if you watch Sue Johnson work, right, with a
oh
couple of
yeah,
people in the room, I mean, I mean, it's a
I
master class in being attuned to your clients and
very much so. And sometimes we get really moved,
yeah.
get really
Yeah, I'll
moved.
cry in session with clients. I'll just find myself crying
Yeah, me too.
and this is when you realize I think therapy is more of an art in a lot of ways. Like we have theories and we have models but
Yeah.
there's an art and there's a context and yeah, psychoeducation is important. Stuff online and like talk helping people is important, but nothing replaces what happens in a room and the context with people, and how lives can be transformed that you can't
Yeah.
get anywhere else. And so I'm biased towards the work that we do, and I think my goal is that I can be healthy for a long, long time and do this work really until I just can't do it anymore, you know?
You know what? You know what I say, Rhett? I say, until I can't remember my clients' names anymore,
Yeah,
I'm going to be sitting in my chair.
yeah,
I'm going to be
but
sitting in my chair in the therapy room because I love what I do, and it's so humbling, and I just learn something every day. And like you were saying, there are days I'll finish a session and I'll think, ah, shit, I really missed it. I missed that. I
yeah.
did not do that. That was not my best work, you know. Um, so it's very humbling, and you know, I mean, I use the word sacred, but I really feel that way. It's just it's very privileged work.
Yeah, and it's one of the professions you can, as I think, as you age, hopefully, and we become more wise in our work, we become more valuable as a therapist. There are many professions, right, at a certain age, like they kind of
Yeah,
put you out to pasture.
that's
Um,
right.
but I
Yeah.
feel like I'm excited about it. And when speaking of men, like I have a lot of older men and men looking, they just, I think. I think some may even see me like as a father figure, like as I
Hmm.
get older and just being able to show up in the room and not tell them what to do, but impart some wisdom to them that they don't
That's
have in
right.
their own life.
Well, Rhett, I have so enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you very, very much for carving time out. So
Yeah.
much we can say about men, about their experience. I love that you're doing this work, and you know, let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
I think
Thank
there's
you. I appreciate it. These are the best kind. And, I started to ramble in some points, so feel free to edit me out where you need to, Laurie. So
Hey, listen, this is Therapist Unplugged, Rhett.
that's
You
right.
know, we're
That's
just
right.
just going to roll with it. It's about conversation. It's about sharing what happens in the therapy room, not only from a client's perspective, but from our perspective, because I think a lot of our clients wonder what the heck is going on in our head as we're sitting in the room listening to them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So this has been wonderful. Thank you very, very much, and have a great weekend.
Yeah. Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Montfort Group aims to provide a serene, calming setting where you can feel challenged, supported, and motivated. Our skilled therapists bridge specialized backgrounds and varied philosophies together to create one unified strategy. Rather than steer you away from your own natural abilities, we help you maximize your unique strengths to uncover the boldest version of yourself. We do not view a broken history as the end of a story. We see it as an opportunity for a new beginning. To learn more about our practice and how we can help you, please visit us at themontfortgroup.com.